All right. Welcome. I seem to have frozen, but the audio seems to be working just fine.
Am I
Anyway,
frozen?
there
Oh,
we
there
go.
you go. Now you're working.
There we go. Welcome to an episode of Pathway to Purpose. And I am super excited here to have Dr. Stanizzi, who's been on episode 62. And, you know, ever since our last conversation, I've gone up, I've met with him. It was a powerful experience for me. It was eye opening and probably one of the first times that I met with a medical physician who really looks at the broader view in such a level of detail and in areas that I look at, but he looks at, and we had a great conversation. So thank you and welcome to the show, Dr. Stanizzi.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words, and thank you for having me back. Yeah, I did enjoy our initial conversation. Uh, you know, uh, before, and enjoyed having you in the office as well for that visit. So,
Yeah. One of the things that was impactful from our last episode, and I've listened to your episodes as well, is the four pillars of health that you refer to, and for me it keeps it in a simple framework. Tell me a little bit, just a quick review for people who haven't tuned in or listened to that one prior. What are the four pillars of health, and how do you kind of discuss them or view them? For sure.
yeah, so to me, the four pillars that I focus on, I lay those out before I even talk about people's labs or go into their history, because I think it's so utterly important in terms of promoting one's health and wellness, is to understand that human health isn't created in a doctor's office. It's not made through a prescription. It's really made through the actions and the behaviors that one takes every day on a continual basis. And those choices that you make in terms of those pillars are either going to accumulate, you're going to get this aggregation of cumulative benefit over time by making better choices more often, or you're going to get a aggregation of decline by making not so great choices so often. And it's kind of like your health is like the sum total of those choices that you make over your course of time. So how do we make health not about the prescription that you get and whether you're timely in your doctor's visits, and create a framework to think about what is it you need to be considering on a daily basis to make sure that you put your health first as a priority, right? And so when I first meet with people, the four pillars I kind of truncate and talk about diet, right? Exercise, sleep, and stress. Now, all four of those pillars are basically what health is built on, but exercise, sleep, uh, stress, and in diet are kind of like the sort of like scratching the surface of those things. But I tell people those are the pillars. That's what's health is built on, and then anything you do above and beyond that, right? Whether you're taking supplements or you're on some sort of like medication, or you are trying to biohack yourself to try to improve your health, it's all got to be built upon that foundation. And if the foundation is shaky, then the things that we might do in our office that do come from a prescription or come from a supplement recommendation or whatever is only going to go so far, right? So that's kind of your overview. When I talk about diet, what we're really talking about is all the things that are getting into your body. So that can be obviously food, good food or bad food, but it can also be things in your environment and what have you that may be getting in there. When we talk about exercise, we can go a little bit deeper. Like, what are you talking about exercise? Really, it's how you move your body. There's aspects of cardiovascular exercise and weight resistance training and pliability, right? So there's deeper levels of that. When we talk about sleep and sleep hygiene, we can talk about like a sleep ritual that you might have, much like maybe a morning ritual to kind of get you into that sleep state. So there are there are different sort of levels of that. I mean, really what we're talking about is how you rest your body. So you could also talk about sleep and say, okay, well, maybe we're not just talking about when you go to bed. We're talking about, are you overtraining? How much time do you take off from the gym so your body can recover, right? Because sleep is about resting the body and resting the mind, right? And then when we talk about stress, really the deeper level of that is what's going on in your headspace and what goes into you having good mental clarity and good mental health, and what are the different aspects of that. And that's where I think having purpose, having a connection of yourself to your community, having a connection to a god or a higher power are all aspects of what's going on between your ears in this, like, consciousness that we have that can either work to improve our experience and our wellness as creatures on this planet or degrade it. And that's something that we spend time with as well. And depending on the patient that I'm seeing and kind of where the conversation goes, we may find ourselves digging deeper into any one of those four pillars. Sometimes we find ourselves basically tabling one of those pillars for the time being, and it's something we might revisit in the future, depending on a person's wishes.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more. One of the things that I've been more focused on, there's a couple things that, like, I feel like I have Dr. Stanizzi in my head.
Okay, good. I've done my job then.
And one of them is, and this is diet first, because I want to just mention that, is stay away from bags and barcodes, right?
Yeah, boxes, bags, and barcodes.
Boxes, bags, and barcodes. And I'm like, that's like, and one of the things that I tell myself, it's like making these small levels of improvement, making these shifts. And I think a lot of people and people, I used to work with people from a health perspective more so. I think people get caught up a lot in the mindset, right? Like, for example, we're talking about stress and, and personal growth, and we're talking about that. People often refer like, hey, it's all in my mind. I'm a stress eater. I do that. When somebody talks to you a little bit about kind of stress eating or stress in their life, what are some of the simple things that you talk to them about when it comes to stress and how to help kind of mitigate that,
So yeah, I mean, so you brought up two things. The first is the idea of stress eating, right? The first,
Yep.
second thing is, what do you do to mitigate stress in general,
Yep.
right? So yeah, that's really two full things. So the first thing I would say is, like, if you find yourself being a stress eater, oftentimes what I find is that there's it's almost just like a subconscious move. Like, you're feeling bad, you're hungry, and you just, like, you find yourself walking to the cabinet, not really even thinking about it, grabbing something to make yourself feel better, right? So that's where I use that trick of being like, look, while we're in the process of reframing your mindset, every time you open your mouth and every time you put something in it, I want you to ask this question: am I eating for nutrition or am I eating for entertainment? Right? And sometimes just getting your brain involved with it and getting yourself out of this kind of like subconscious behavioral loop is enough to begin to break the cycle. Because I find it's hard for people if they are being honest and they say, okay, for the last day and a half, every time I ate, I was eating for entertainment. Right? You really got to do a gut check on that and be like, should I be doing this? Right? So that's one of the kind of simple tricks I use. And then I tell people that's all you have to do, right? You don't necessarily have to change your diet, just qualify why you're eating, right? Then after a week or two, if you want to get back, you can start saying, okay, is it possible for me to avoid eating for entertainment at least once today? Like, at least once today, when I am about to eat for entertainment, I'm going to make the conscious choice to eat something instead that has higher nutritional value. So it's like, getting a, granola bar from the cabinet versus going and maybe having like an apple with peanut butter or having some carrots or something like that, like something else to munch on. Oh, I feel like I want to drink something, so I'm going to go have, a diet soda. Well, could you maybe brew some tea, right? Like, so those are things like, give yourself the challenge. And then it's like creating those little micro changes on top of each other. That, again, is that aggregation of marginal benefit that allows you to begin to move the needle and rechange and reframe your mindset about these behaviors. But the first thing to do is bring awareness to why it is that you're doing these things in the first place.
I love it. I love it. What about the stress component? Like, because people in general, I think a lot of people are feeling a level of stress in their lives, and then it leads to, then I'm a stress eater, right? Like what comes first, right? Like the chicken, like, am I just feeling stress or am I looking to escape or do something? Like, sometimes when I eat, like, when I was trying to think about entertainment, for entertainment reasons, for the taste and that enjoyment. I've started to play around with the fact that maybe I'm feeling a little cravey and I need to eat protein to satisfy me. You know what I mean? So I'm starting to play around with that ever since we met. Like I've started to look at these little micro things in my world. But tell me, like, if somebody's like really stressed, have you ever had some patients that come in and you could just see the kind of stress pouring off them or just kind of coming out of them? And how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to say, what is it that is causing the stress? And in my mind, I kind of put stress into one of two categories. Like, I think we have to give credence, like if someone's in like an abusive relationship and they can't get out, or, someone's about to like, literally like lose their house because of financial issues or whatever. Like that's stress that's appropriate. What I find that was more often than not, the stress that we feel is self-induced. I was just having this conversation with my daughter, right? She's 13 years old and whatever, and I see her stressing out over schoolwork. And granted, like, we have a perspective, like you're in seventh grade, like it's, like it's gonna be okay. Like, getting 1B is not gonna, it's gonna be all right, I promise, right? But you can see the stress building up, and it's all self-generated. Now we can have this conversation as adult males saying like, well, that's just silly that your seventh grader is getting all upset over getting honors versus high honors. But the reality is that as adults we have a tendency to do the same thing, but we're not as aware of it because we don't have that insight into our own behaviors, right? I liken it, and I say, look, I always like to look through human health through the kind of prism of evolution. And if you look at the stress response, right, of our brains, it's based upon survival, right? And it was probably pretty good adaptation 100,000 years ago to have a heightened sense of, let me predict what's the worst possible thing that could happen if I take this action, right? And then you're less likely to take the action, which keeps you from dying, right? I use the analogy of like, okay, you're out and you're like, we've never slept in this cave before. I wonder what would happen if we go explore this cave. And that part of your brain that keeps you alive says there could be a bear in there that's going to eat you, right? So you're like, you know what? Let's not sleep in this cave tonight. Let's go sleep in the cave that we know about, right? Like, so it's a part of our wiring to sort of prognosticate, bad things, right? It's part of our nature to have that like negative bias towards things. Realizing that that's how our brains are wired gives you the first ability to like look at the reasons why you're stressed and say, is this real, right? Do I need to do this? Because I tell most people that, look, you're obviously stressed out, but let's take a step back, right? Right now, at this moment, what is real? What's actually going on at the moment? And people say, like, okay, like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're sitting here in my office, right? Am I about to like murder you? Is there someone like, is a roof going to fall on you? Are we under attack? No. Okay. Right now you're in a safe spot, right? You're having a conversation with another human. Nothing bad is happening. There may be other stuff going on in your life, but that's not what's going on right now. Right. This is kind of Eckhart Tolle's like power of now, kind of like a mindset where what happens is that we have a tendency to, in any given moment, lose sight of what's happening at the moment because we prefer to either A, create memories of the past or predictions of the future, both of which usually have a tendency to be, let me remember the things in the past that make me angry or hurt me so I can avoid that in the future. And let me worry about the things that may be coming down the road that are going to become problematic so I can try to avoid them. How is it that I'm going to avoid paying this bill? Or how is it that I'm going to pay this bill that's coming down the pike or whatever? And so we spend a lot of time worrying about the past and worrying about the future, completely ignoring the only thing that's actually real, which is what's happening in this moment, right? Because those other things, the past and the present, we have a tendency to think that is real, but but it's not. Our memories and our thoughts are reflections of the truth, reflections of reality, but not reality itself, because in our minds, it distorts the reality.
I love that. That I love that. It's like this. I think it's like this projection and reflection of what's going on in our minds, kind of plays out in our thoughts that may or may not be true. But what I love from a physician hearing Eckhart Tolle and the power of now and the presence process. So and just looking at being present. So do you have a presence process in your life? Do you practice that?
Yeah, I mean, I often tell people that the fact that I'm here now, right, having this conversation with you, that I decided to depart from like what would be considered the safe and traditional route of just continuing to do my surgical subspecialty urology and branch out and say, look, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to create a podcast. I'm going to have these conversations. I'm going to try to teach people about health and wellness in the context of medicine is very much a departure of what I thought my life was going to be when I first did it. And getting back to your question, the reason why I think I was able to develop the capacity to do that was through a meditative practice that I began, God, I don't know, 10 years ago at this point. And I've been meditating on a regular basis since that time. And the first time that I thought meditation itself was actually beneficial was that my wife could see a palpable change in how I behaved and how I reacted when I started doing that on a regular basis, right? And and we use meditation in kind of this broad term. People like have this like, oh, you mean meditation? It's like they have this idea of like you're underneath a tree, coming, with cross-legged saying right? And that is a type of meditation. But I tell people like, look, meditation is different, right? Meditation is like saying exercise. I exercise. Okay, well, what do you mean by you exercise? Like, what do you mean that you're exercising? Meditation is the same. You can have meditation, which is kind of hermetic, right? Like a hermit that's in the cave someplace going trying to like reach the state of nirvana by closing out everything. But that's not what meditation has to be. Meditation can be incorporated in using affirmations, right? Prayer is a form of meditation. You can do visualizations and projections, right? You can take opportunities to sort of try to have forgiveness. So there's different forms of meditation that you can incorporate, and it becomes a skill, right? Just like exercise. You'd be like, oh, I learned how to do a squat, now I'm gonna learn to do a curl, and I can learn to do burpees or whatever. It's like but they all kind of work together. So my meditative process has morphed and changed over the years, but I think all of it has cumulatively resulted in this like personal growth practice and sort of a more broader sense of connection to something greater than myself through that process. The first bit for me when I first started doing it was just simply realizing how often my thoughts would take over my consciousness, and then second step was realizing my consciousness and the idea of me being a presence in this life is distinctly different than the thoughts that my brain creates that have a tendency to just dump over the conscious experience that I have. And when I realized that what was happening, like, okay, well, how is it that I can control my thought processes and have a little bit more of a flexibility in how I respond?
Creating that space, kind of mental space between like stimulus and response a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think you're quoting like Victor Longo from the I think that's the author. I forget the name of the book, but he wrote about concentration camps, and what he was talking about was exactly that aspect of it, is that the ability to separate stimulus from response is where there's a space, and in that space you get to control how you react. You may not be able to control anything else in your life, but that is always in your control.
I love that because it's been a focus, like, how, like, we're in 2025 as we record this, and we met at the latter end of 2024, and everyone kind of, not everyone, but a lot of people are like, hey, what's going to be different, right? And I started to look at spiritual fitness in addition to physical fitness. Like, it was something that I realized that you need to practice, and it's a skill, just like like you said, like doing curls or whatever it is, and it becomes this habit which helps train the mind, which I think is powerful. And I think what I used to do, and a lot of people are saying, "Well, I'm so stressed, I can't even calm my mind down." Like, so they don't even start, right? So there's not even this ability to start. And in my practice, I started to just when I was at that spot of just starting, I just sat with my breath and just noticed my body, like where my fingers were, like just
Mhm.
to even acknowledge myself in this space, which created this level of awareness. Because I think a lot of us get so distracted and busy, we get so disconnected
Correct.
from ourselves.
Hmm.
And here we go on this play of like, and then we therefore are disconnected from people. You know what I mean? And it's a pretty interesting phenomenon. I love the fact that, was this something they taught you in medical school at all?
No, not at all. Half the stuff I talk about these days, I didn't learn in medical school. I learned it through personal experience. I learned it through educating myself. I say medical school, if you think about how medical school is constructed, right? The first part of medical school is learning about normal physiology, right? That's where you have anatomy and physiology, dissect the cadaver, right? You learn about like the different organ systems, right? That's the first year of medical school. Second year of medical school is learning about pathology, right? How is it that all these organ systems can go wrong, right? So now you're formulating a system about how you can diagnose disease. That's part two, right? Then in that you learn pharmacology, right? Then you start going on your rotations and you're putting this into practice. What's the diagnosis, doctor? What did you decide? Okay, what would you recommend for treatment? And treatment always revolves around either A, I'm not sure what's going on, so we need to get more diagnostic testing, which almost always takes the form of blood work or additional imaging studies, and then formulating a diagnosis and coming up with a treatment plan, which usually involves either A, surgery, or B, involves use of pharmaceuticals. And you get 4 years of that process. So by the time you're done training, that's what you've learned. You've learned how to diagnose disease and offer pharmacotherapy for the disease that you've diagnosed, or a surgical intervention if there is some sort of like anatomic problem that needs to be addressed, whether it's you have a tumor or there's some sort of blockage and you're testing, or you have a kidney stone or whatever it is. Like, that's medicine, right? And that's what medicine has evolved to over the course of time. When you ask yourself about, okay, like we talked about those pillars of health, right? Not only do we not spend a significant amount of time talking about diet and nutrition in medical school, talking about, spiritual health and meditation, like not even on the radar. Exercise, we kind of understand is important. And, but there's not any like exercise physiology type of classes that we have in medical school. And, there aren't really any topics about sleep. And so that's kind of like, when we talk about like obstructive sleep apnea, we don't necessarily talk about the phases of sleep and how to get restful sleep and how to counsel patients on like when's the best time to go to sleep. None of that happens. Now, to make matters worse, none of those things you actually do in training, right? When I think about like, my medical school training, like it was like, okay, let's talk about diet. Nope, didn't have time to eat, ran down to the cafeteria, grabbed whatever garbage I could find. I was just looking for cheap calories. I was often tired, overworked, and so I'd often gravitate to like eating whatever was taste good and what made me feel better for the moment, because I was under a lot of stress. Like if I told you that like I would have a slice of pizza at the corner pizza store on my way back to my apartment, at least 5 days of the week, I would not be lying, right? So my diet was terrible. I was chronically sleep deprived. I was under a ton of stress, and sleep is for the weak when you're training as a surgeon. So like none of the things that have to create a healthy human are things that you were even able to indulge as you're training to be a doctor, supposedly trying to figure out ways to help people become healthy.
Being a registered nurse, and I used to work in the ICU in the hospital, and I used to look at some of the doctors that were going through training, the residents and then the fellows, and I'm like, man, this is almost as bad as boot camp. Like these guys, like I was like, they're like working and they're up all the time, and it was I saw the toll on them, and I was like, man, it's like an initiation.
Yeah, it's like hazing, right? But
Oh,
this is and nowadays you have like the 80-hour work week, right? Like that's Like that's an improvement. Like we're only going to make you work 80 hours a week. Like we're going to limit it to 80 hours a week, because if it wasn't that, I mean, you'd be working 120 hours a week, and like that's where the word resident comes from. Like back in the day, you lived in the hospital because you were a resident. That's where it came from. Like you lived there, and that's where you learned. So whatever. I mean, it's the system is what it is. But no, none of this stuff I learned in medical school. I learned it after the fact through, again, the things that I incorporated myself to improve my own health, as well as the things that I discovered when I started looking at the world of healing from a functional medicine standpoint rather than a traditional medical standpoint. Which is not to say that traditional medicine doesn't have its benefits, but it really shines in the treatment of acute pathology. Right? When you're dealing with chronic disease, that's where the medical system doesn't do so hot. And the problem is that the medical system doesn't realize its own shortcomings in the treatment of long-term chronic disease, because the way you treat it is through these pillars of health. It isn't necessarily through the prescription you provide. Right? And until doctors, patients, medical organizations, and larger companies, as well as government, understand that one point, we're still going to be in a situation where we're going to spend a ton of money on healthcare and not actually deliver like significant benefits to overall long-term human health. If you're hit by a bus, I'm glad that I'm in the United States and have access to our traditional healthcare system, right? If I have an infection, if I break a bone, like those are reasons that the traditional healthcare are there, and they've done amazing miracles in the treatment of acute disease, acute pathology, and even in malignancies, cancers, etc. Right? Where they're not so good at is how do you reshape someone's mindset about the food and the crap that we eat in the pursuit of trying to like reverse or try to compensate for someone's type 2 diabetes. Like, eat better and exercise. Like that's what you got to do. Here's metformin. Here's your insulin, but you got to eat better and exercise. Really got to change your diet. See you in 3 months. To me, it would be like that. That's if I ran like a homeless shelter and I tell people like, hey, you know what you got to do? You just got to build a house. That's it. Just go build a house. You won't be homeless anymore. Congratulations. Go out, build a house. See you in 3 months. What, you didn't build a house? Well, if you don't know the first thing about zoning, framing, putting in a foundation, hang and dry, like you can't build a house. You need those building blocks of actionable information in order to be able to start taking steps towards improving your diet and exercising and having a willingness to educate yourself, which goes back to that personal growth practice, where you say like, how is it that today I can be a better version of myself than I was yesterday? And if that becomes your priority every day, the aggregation of those marginal benefits over time changes who you are as a person, what you do as a person, and the value that you bring to the world.
I love that you mentioned that in personal growth and like making these small steps, right? And taking in towards our growth. The thing I think that we get caught up in is like we're not getting these instantaneous results right away, right? And so we wind up going back to like, oh, it doesn't work, or it's not happening fast enough, and we get going back to our old ways rather than looking at these kind of millimeters or these small changes and starting to celebrate those. What's your take on helping somebody in making these small steps in these personal growths? And also, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. And going back to spiritual health as well, how can somebody do that and make small steps? Because I think, and I know I'm talking, people talk, when you talk about spiritual things, they may associate it with religion and totally shut down. Not to say that religion's bad, like, or anything like that, but the principles in spiritual health allow us to have some mental freedom to help us grow as well. So I know I threw a lot at you there. Did you get it all?
Yeah, I think there was like 7 questions in one. The first part was, how do I help someone in terms of like micro habits?
Micro habits, yeah, and personal, right, and the growth side of that,
and the personal growth side. So I mean, again, I think it is helpful to give people like actionable steps. So I usually in like a personal growth habit, I often steer people to the book by Hal Elrod called The Miracle Morning. Right. And so that's one that I like to recommend because it's a book and it gives a framework of how you can start your day with a process that cumulatively over time will benefit you. And it's actionable steps. And there's a nice little acronym that says, okay, these are the components of it. And you can start it every day. And so like I explain it in kind of like the truncated version, but if you're looking to start your day with a morning practice that is the foundation block for personal growth, what does that look like, right? So with Hal Elrod's book, the short stories, he was I think he'd had some sort of like personal coaching kind of business that like went underground or went bankrupt in 2008 during that economic crisis. He started walking every day and found that the morning walks were really helpful in terms of like helping with his stress level and mental health. And so he started to ask the question, if this is my miracle morning, I know very successful people usually have morning routines, and I wonder if I can find commonality. So he looked at, historical figures, he looked at, prominent, celebrities and business people, and said, okay, like what are the things that these people are doing? And what he found is like no one really had the same morning routine, but he did find that everybody had at least one of seven components of it. And he used the acronym SAVERS to help you think about those acronyms. And I use 6 of the 7, just for my own personal growth, but it consists of so SAVERS. S is silence, which is his acronym to remember, mnemonic to remember meditation. Right there, we go back to meditation. The idea of taking some time, sitting down, realizing you're here in this moment, listening, hearing what's going on around you, feeling your body, and observing your thoughts. Right, that was his version of meditation. Right. Then there was affirmations, right, which with me is part of a meditative process, and that's taking time to be appreciative of the things that are around you, right? So appreciative of, whether it's things in your personal life, or perhaps you're appreciative about something about work, you're appreciative about something about yourself, but taking time to acknowledge the things that you have, right, the things that have benefited you, and really feeling the gratitude of having those things. For some people that may be more of like a prayer, right? And whether you're praying to your particular God or Jesus or, Yahweh or whatever, like that's, that has that affirmation, right? And that's why I think prayer has been such a powerful and ubiquitous part of human evolution and human, culture over time, is because there is power in that affirmative, being grateful, thanking something, for what you have. So that's A. Right. V is visualization. Right. And so that's the idea of saying, like, where is it that I'm going? Right. What is it that I see myself accomplishing? And I think the sort of more, shallow version of that would be something like, I want to have a Ferrari, or I want to have a mansion. And you kind of like have this, vision of stuff. I think that is obviously beneficial because it kind of gives you an idea of maybe where you're going. I think what's a more powerful vision is the idea of, what can I do in the future that brings value to others, right? And if you have a vision for bringing some sort of value, bringing some sort of like ability to like leave the world better off as a result of your efforts, that's a much more powerful vision. And I kind of feel from like a spiritual place that like if that's your vision and you start focusing on it, you can feel what that's like. The world begins to conspire for your success. All right. And then the thing that you visualized may come along with that as kind of like, as kind of a benefit. Like if I really think about my life now and where it is, it's kind of like the life that I had visualized back in the day. Do I still have work to do? Yeah. Do I still have other things I want to accomplish? Absolutely. But right now in the here and now, am I kind of doing and living the life that I had envisioned for myself 25 years ago? And the answer is yeah. Right. So you have the visualization aspect of it. The other important part of visualization for him was this idea of like working it backwards, being like, okay, if I want to be this place in 5 years, what do I have to do in a year? Where do I have to be in a year, right? If I want to be there in a year, where do I have to be in a month, right? If I'm there in a month, where do I have to be at the end of the week? And if I want to be there by the end of the week, what is it that I need to do today? And actually visualize yourself taking that one positive step towards that ultimate goal, right? And that's, so that's the visualization. E is exercise, right? So doing something to move your body, get your body moving in the morning. I usually do exercise at the end of the day, so I cut that one out personally, but that's just me. Um, Reading, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean reading a book, right? But it means doing something to acquire the knowledge or acquire information that is going to result in your personal growth and your improvement, right? Your skill sets expanding. All right. And the last one is scribing. So the idea of writing down, journaling. There is power in kind of getting pen to paper in terms of writing down goals or writing down what is you're trying to accomplish in life. And I think when you do those things, it has a tendency to give your day and ultimately your life a little bit more direction. And that gives you a sense of control. And when you have a sense of control, that naturally has this ability of kind of taking that stress level down a few notches, because you always kind of feel like, yeah, life is going to throw stuff at me, but I'm going to be able to weather that storm and move through because I have this process that keeps me always moving in the right direction.
I love that. It's that discipline. I actually read that book and have incorporated a morning routine. I think what S was scribing. Isn't there something about the writing?
Yeah, scribing. So SAVERS. The last one is scribing, right? So writing, putting pen to paper. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I think that is a great place to start. I remember I was like listening to it because I listen to a lot of this on Audible, and I was like, let me just do a little bit of each and develop a little bit of a habit instead of taking this big bite out of it where it was like consuming my whole morning and then I'm rushing out and missing out on the things. And obviously
Mhm.
getting up early is one of the things. One of the things that I've done as far as the morning routine is there's something about hitting snooze. I try not to hit snooze on I use my phone as the alarm, and they say like kind of set that up across the room and get up right away. I found that if I snoozed on other things in my world. So I don't know if that ever cropped up for you with the snooze in the morning. Do you get up
Yeah.
right away, or do you like?
So I know I'm still a snooze hitter, but what I've found is that I get up earlier and earlier. So like nowadays, like my second or third snooze is still like an hour earlier than I used to get up years ago. So I figure that's a good trade off. Because for me, like I'm usually getting up at around like 4:30 in the morning. It's because I like to dedicate an hour towards that like personal growth practice on a regular basis. Because I do find it's helpful. A short personal, short meditative practice, personal growth practice, maybe like 20 minutes. But usually it's closer to an hour if I can manage it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So for the person, we've talked about a lot of stuff. We kind of went. So for the person who's just kind of entertaining some ideas, like looking at their health in a different way, when they're looking at this aspect of their health, what suggestions would you give somebody who's just kind of starting out and doesn't know where to start?
So I usually refer them to a couple of apps that I've found helpful. So if they're looking to begin some sort of meditative process, but they're like, I don't know where to begin, there's this great app called Insight Timer, INSIGHT Insight Timer. It's the largest, I think, repository of like guided meditations and kind of spiritual kind of practices anywhere out there. And the free version still has like tens of thousands of things that you can access for free. Now, if you want to pay like the yearly subscription and have access to everything, I think the last time I checked, it was only like $60 a year, which is like really cheap, right? And then that allows access to other stuff. But there's everything in there from like shamanic drum journeying to like just like meditation for beginners and everything in between. So it's a good place to start, begin playing around and feel like, what is it that sort of speaks to you? Because what I might find enjoyable and really kind of helpful in, setting me in kind of the right path during the day may not speak to another person. So like having that little bit of variety is a good place. And because you can basically start playing around and it doesn't cost you a nickel, do that. And I start off really simple. I'm like, just spend 5 minutes every morning playing around with this thing, but do it consistently. And you can decide over time, is it worth spending more time on it? But give yourself at least a month, spend a little bit of time in this kind of like quiet zone and see what happens, right? Start simple, start small, start manageable. Because if I tell people like, okay, I want you to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and spend an hour working on personal growth practices, no one's going to do it, right? I wouldn't have done it starting off that way, but it was, to me, I saw the value over time, and I was willing to commit more and more time to the process because I found the process was valuable once I started doing it. You know, I think the app that I first used was like Headspace, right? And that was the first time I kind of like got an idea of like, oh, this is what meditation is supposed to be about, right? So that's it. Now, what you said, I think is important for mentioning, is the people that say, I'm just so wired, I can't meditate, right? Like, I just can't get out of my own head. Now, one might argue you're exactly the person that needs to meditate. It's like a person that's, you know, saying like, well, I tried to go to the gym, but I got really short of breath when I was on the treadmill for about, 2 or 3 minutes. So I don't think exercise is for me. Like, no, exercise is for you. We might have to do some things first to get you to that point, but you definitely need exercise in your life. So if you're like saying to yourself, I can't meditate because my brain's going at a million miles an hour, that is God's way of telling you, you need to figure out how to get control of your own thoughts. Mm-hmm. Now, if sitting down and trying to meditate and watching your brain go in a million directions is super frustrating, the second app that I recommend, and this is one, there's probably other ones out there, but this is the one I found that I thought was interesting myself, is called Othership, which that one is a paid app, but that one's all about breath work, right? It's the idea of like grooving and kind of like cool music set to these breathing patterns, right? Now, there's kind of like the slow yourself down and go to sleep and, have some, kind of quiet time. And then there's the upregulated breath work. And that breath work is the stuff that kind of gets you moving. It's really about it's like forcing yourself to hyperventilate, which creates an interesting pattern, because if you're really activated and your brain's going a million miles an hour, by doing breath work first, getting into that hyperventilated state, breathing aggressively, breathing deeply, and doing it sort of with this coach, what ends up happening is once you're done, your parasympathetic nervous system goes up and your sympathetic nervous system goes down, and it's a state shift that puts you in a more restful, relaxing state. And a lot of people, once they do a breathwork session like that, are much more easily able to go into like a meditative state.
I love that. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of breath work for sure. I've played around with a lot of it, and living on the lake, I've also jumped into the ice holes, into the ice water. And watching that. But, one of the things that I did too, and, there's a lot of apps out there. I had Calm initially, the Calm app.
Yep. Calm is good. I enjoy that one too.
And there was an introductory to meditation. The guy was actually really entertaining and helpful in that. And it started to create a springboard of encouragement, because what happens is, for somebody with a busy mind, it can be frustrating because you feel like you need to do something other than, that you need to be perfect or great at it and not get discouraged. And one of the other things too, I started out was just walking, like a walking meditation, to create some space and some rhythm, and that was helpful too. But I love that, because we talk about fitness, people talk about diet and fitness when they think about health, right? People are like diet and fitness and weight loss, right? And they're not looking at this broader view and this broader picture that could help ease some of those other areas if you just kind of looked at the balance.
Yeah, I think it's all a component. And what I find is consistently, if something feels out of balance, you can usually find those other areas that whether it's really stress and sleep, I think kind of are like yin and yang, right? Like it's hard to get good night's sleep if you're kind of stressed out. So to me, I think one usually benefits the other. And if I have to put a priority on something that a lot of people who are thinking about their health aren't thinking about, it's often that meditative personal growth, observing your thoughts and figuring out how to get a control of this monkey mind that we're all born with.
Yeah. And that's it. It's training the monkey mind. I love that. I love that. Well, Dr. Stanizzi, thank you for hopping on here and sharing some of your insights. It's not so frequent we get a medical doctor that's talking about these topics and is passionate about this area. And I'm glad that there's more, that there's a physician, and physicians are starting to look at this for sure and helping in those ways, you know?
Well, I think it's a different paradigm, and I hope as I sort of preach the gospel, as it were, that other providers and other people that do this will begin to kind of understand the importance of doing these things alongside of the pharmacology and the surgeries and the things that make our medical system great. We have the opportunity to make it even better. We just kind of got to learn where those uh, you know where those additional skill sets need to be developed.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and I will, in the show notes and in the posts, we'll make sure that your information is there, and your podcast, which, what's the title of your podcast, Dr.
Yeah.
Stanizzi?
So the podcast I have is called the Evo Podcast. It's a short for the evolution of wellness. So Evo Well Podcast, 2 words: Evo space Well. That's where you can find us. Bio Restore, New Hampshire is where my practice is, and that's where you can come in for health coaching, hormone replacement kind of stuff. We have Facebook post, a Facebook group, and that kind of stuff that you can join as well.
That is great. Thank you, doctor, for showing up and sharing your insight here.
All right. Well, I appreciate the time, and we'll have an opportunity to